Good evening again, and welcome back to TBN Special Election Night coverage. Joining me tonight, Ashley Hayek from America First and New York's Rob Astorino, plus Erick Stakelbeck outside the U.S. Capitol, and also Pastor Alan Jackson, who is with us here in Dallas, Texas. But first, some important races that have been called. Let's turn to some of those. In Florida, big win for Senator Marco Rubio over the Democratic challenger Val Demings. Also in Kentucky now, Rand Paul, an easy winner over Democratic challenger Charles Booker. In North Carolina, it looks like Ted Budd, the Republican, is up by a considerable margin at this point over Sherry Lynn Beasley. In New Hampshire, we've got Maggie Hassan up over Don Bolduc, but that has yet to be called. In Ohio, J.D. Vance leading Tim Ryan. In South Carolina, incumbent Senator Republican Tim Scott, projected to win over Crystal Matthews. And some of the governor's races now in Florida, Ron DeSantis, an easy win over Democratic challenger Charlie Crist. In Georgia, Brian Kemp, it appears that he's on track at this point to win over Stacey Abrams. And also in, what else? We've got in Arkansas. Oh, yes, this is a big one for us here at TBN. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the projected winner over Democratic challenger Chris Jones. Welcome. And now, let's go to Sarah Huckabee Sanders. Here's a little taste of her acceptance speech.
This has been an absolutely unbelievable and incredible 2 years. I first want to start by thanking my two opponents here in the final stretch, Chris Jones and Ricky Dale Harrington. One of the most amazing things about tonight is that no matter how it turned out, Arkansas was going to make history tonight. I know it will be the honor of a lifetime to serve as Arkansas's 47th governor and the first female governor the state of Arkansas has ever had. I'd also like to say we'll be the first, to my knowledge, father-daughter governor anywhere in the country. I like to say I think my dad's the best governor Arkansas has ever had, one of the best governors the country has ever seen, and I'm hoping to take that title away from him pretty soon. The good news is there's nobody who hopes for that more than he and my mom. One of the things I love most about Arkansas, and certainly love about the campaign, is the people that you meet along the way. I've gotten the opportunity over the last 2 years to fall in love with Arkansas over and over and over and over again, and it has been tremendous. I also had the chance to take my kids on this journey, for them to see Arkansas, frankly, in the way that I did growing up, and it has been amazing to watch them see some of these things for the first time. We got to watch George, our youngest, win the Hope Watermelon Festival contest. Way to go, George. We got to watch Scarlett grow up and become the most amazing big sister to her two brothers. We are so proud of you. And just this week, our son Huck was elected mayor in his elementary school. But at the end of the day, this campaign was never about me. It was about each of you. It was about all of the people across the state of Arkansas, the people who showed up at our events, the people who made calls, the people who knocked doors, and frankly, even the people who did not vote for me. This election is about taking Arkansas to the top. I know that Arkansas can be first, and I'm committed to being the leader that takes us there. To my parents who have supported me no matter what I was doing, my brothers, my sister-in-law, my in-laws who welcomed me into their family as if I was one of their own, to each of my kids, most importantly to my husband, who has been the rock for our family, not just over the course of these 2 years, but frankly, over the course of nearly 13 years of marriage. Brian, I am so grateful for you. And thank you so much to the people of Arkansas who've entrusted this responsibility to me. I will be forever grateful to each of you, and I promise I won't let you down. I will never, ever forget who and what we are fighting for, because I have 3 little reminders, Scarlett, Huck, and George, who are gonna hold me accountable and remind me that every single decision I make as governor will have a direct impact on their life and the life of every kid in Arkansas. That is not at all something I take lightly, but it is something I know I'm ready to take on. I look forward to being Arkansas's very best governor for the next 8 years. Thank you so much. God bless you. God bless our great state. Thank you.
Well, that's the new governor-elect of Arkansas, Sarah Huckabee Sanders. And I know of a very proud papa who's standing by, Governor Mike Huckabee, or should I refer to you as former governor? Let's stick with former.
Yeah, I think that's probably right, and it's going to be the has-been governor. I kind of expecting that people will come up to me and say, hey, didn't you used to be somebody? And, you know, when I go out and make speeches, it'll be, ladies and gentlemen, here's Sarah's dad. But I am one proud dad tonight, and I'm grateful to God that this is a young lady who loves God, is committed to serving him in that role, is unapologetic, pro-life advocate, believes the right stuff, and is strong enough to stick by it. And that's what I'm proud of, not just the victory of being governor, but knowing that she has some core convictions and principles that she will not abandon. That makes me prouder than anything.
Well, I saw that over a number of months and years, in fact, at the White House when she was press secretary for Donald Trump. She's a tough, tough woman, and she can withstand those slings and arrows because I've seen it firsthand. A double win for you tonight. I understand that your grandson, Huck, is the winner of the governorship in elementary school. Do I detect some nepotism involved here?
Maybe a little bit. You know, it must run in the family, but he got elected mayor of his elementary school. Okay. Which is pretty cool. I did want to say, now, I helped him with his speech.
Oh, did you?
But he wrote it, and he did a great job with it, so I'll give him all the credit. I just was really proud of him this week as well.
Governor, on a more serious note, let's take a look at some of the other races around the country and trends you're seeing. I don't know in your celebration whether you've had a chance to look at some of this, but what are you detecting?
You know, it looks like a great night for Republicans. I think the red wave is truly happening. There's some of these races we're not going to know right away. Unfortunately, some of these states count slow. That's really too bad. We ought to be able to get it done. I mean, Florida's the 3rd largest state in the country. Their elections are just flawless, and they have all the results tabulated within a few hours after the election polls close. Every state ought to emulate that, and this nonsense of waiting several days or even weeks to get the results is really unacceptable, and the people of those states should be demanding a greater level of accountability. But having said that, it appears that the Republicans will take both the Senate and the House, and you know, we're still waiting on a lot of numbers to see just how many seats, but some significant races. When you see the margins of races like Marco Rubio's in Florida that you mentioned earlier before we came to this segment, you're beginning to see a trend that it's not just squeaking out victories, but in many cases they're decisive and they're overwhelming.
Governor, get back to the slow count that we're seeing in so many states. A lot of this is attributable to the vast array of early votes that we're seeing, absentee ballots, mail-in ballots, things of that sort. But we see even third world countries produce results so much faster than the United States. And it just engenders the kind of serious doubt that so many people have in our system here. It feeds that cynicism about it all. What is the solution to it?
The solution is these states doing what Florida did after the debacle of 2000 in that Bush-Gore race that was such a mess and embarrassed them. And they decided they didn't want to be the laughing stock of the country, so they got their act together. They developed a system that works. It's worked beautifully. Nobody ever says, gee, Florida's not doing very well vote counting. They do great. Never questioned. Never does anyone after a Florida vote anymore say, well, we're not sure about these results. So we know it can be done. And if it can be done in a state as large as Florida, it can certainly be done in Arizona, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and some of these states where they still seem to have problems getting the job done. So what I hope is that the people and the legislatures of those states will demand that their states quit being the embarrassment. And that's what this is. This is embarrassing to say we don't know who won the election, and we may not know for several days or a couple of weeks.
There seems to be...
The reason that's important is what you mentioned, is that if people doubt the integrity of the election, they begin to doubt the system itself, and that's not good for anybody.
There seems to be a bit of an overlap between those states which are slow to count and those states which have a rich tradition of election fraud. I don't want to, that may sound too cynical, and I'm not pointing to election fraud because there's no evidence of that, but there is that overlap.
Well, I think that what we're seeing is that these are the states that people question. So when people say, oh, these election deniers, you know, I know a lot of people that don't deny the election, but they do question it, and there's a difference. And quite frankly, we ought to question elections when one candidate is leading and then they stop counting the votes and 2 days later they come back and then lo and behold, another candidate ends up winning. It may be legit. There may not be a thing that is untowards about the way that process went, but it sure does smell and look funny. So wouldn't a state do better by themselves and for themselves if they just cleaned up the way they did their elections and made them so that there are no questions about the integrity of them?
Indeed. Governor, thank you so much for your time. I can tell you're a little bit under the weather with that hoarse voice, but we really appreciate the night has just begun for you. The partying part begins right now. But thanks very much for your time. Good to see you.
Doug, thank you. God bless.
You too. And we'll be back in just a moment.
As we naturally age, many people are getting zero amount of this incredible and unique substance. That's when we start seeing an impact in our joints, skin, nails, and even our digestion.
People ask me, Dr. X, what is the #1 supplement I should be taking? My answer is multi-collagen protein.
I love the multi-collagen protein, and I've seen huge benefits. I went from having joint discomfort to where now I have freedom of mobility that I did not have. I've been able to work out more. I've had the energy. Ancient Nutrition provides us with the right supplements that we need in order to be strong, healthy, and to do the things that God has actually called us to do.
Call the number on your screen and get a free bottle with your preferred customer order, a value of over $50 free.
When you call and purchase, you are helping to spread the gospel around the world by supporting TBN.
Call the number on your screen or go online now.
Every day, people are being given hope. Hope that is brought to them by a ship unlike any other, Mercy Ships. The largest floating civilian hospital in the world, with volunteer medical staff and crew who donate their time. With the addition of our newest ship, Global Mercy, we need volunteers to join us in our mission. Whether you can join with us as a volunteer or in prayer, we cherish your support. To learn more, visit mercyships.org today.
Time to check in with our Erick Stakelbeck, who is in Washington, D.C. Tonight. Erick, I want to ask you about the special which you did last night on integrity in elections and restoring faith in our country through that. You featured prominently in that special Governor Greg Abbott of Texas and also Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida, both big winners tonight. Is there a lesson in that?
Doug, the lesson they gave is both of them described it to me as the 3 F's: faith, family, and freedom. That's really what they've run their states on. And I think Governor DeSantis, Doug, in his victory speech tonight, summed it up when he said, Florida is where woke goes to die. And whether it's COVID mandates, mask and vaccine mandates, closing down the schools, whether it's the gender madness, critical race theory in the schools as well. Florida and Texas, in particular, the leaders, DeSantis and Abbott, took such a strong stand against that, a public stand. And even in the COVID days, Doug, especially, it was very unpopular in Florida. Governor DeSantis caught a lot of heat for pushing to keep schools open, for opposing mandates. He was vindicated in the end, and I think the people of Florida saw him as a strong, bold leader who did not bend to the relentless pressure from the woke mob and from the mainstream media. I think that was the stream running through both Abbott and DeSantis, their campaigns, the way they've governed their states, and both of them made very clear when I spoke to them, Doug, that faith is at the forefront of what they're doing. And they said, look, faith, family, freedom, again, those three F's, they all go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. So they see their states, Texas and Florida, as a blueprint for the rest of the country. Could these two red states, Doug, be a key to restoring America? Will other states pick up some of those policies, take the example of success we've seen in Texas and Florida with people flocking there from blue states, with businesses flocking there as well? Will they serve as a blueprint for other states and really help to spark a turnaround?
Erick Stakelbeck, that is just a great, great question. It's one that looms over the next 2 years. Joining us now is a friend of this program, Colin Reed. Colin, I don't know if you heard what Erick just had to say there, but it seems to me that these two states, Texas and Florida especially, are models of what's happening in this country with the migration from the northern blue states, people fed up with the services, the high taxes, migrating to where faith, freedom exist and are flourishing.
Yeah, and Doug, you both nailed it, because Florida used to be the perennial battleground state. It always used to be up for grabs, and we'd look to see which way it was going to go, to see which way the national winds blow. 4 years ago, Senator Scott and Governor DeSantis, in their first runs for office, they both won in nail biters. It almost went to recounts. They were both squeakers. This time, last I checked, Governor DeSantis was up by 20 points. Senator Rubio wasn't that far behind. And what happened in the meantime? A couple of things. One, the pandemic and all those decisions that Governor DeSantis made, for which he was derided by the critics in real time, have looked better and better with the benefit of hindsight. Whereas the policies, for instance, of schools that have been shut down and kids' test scores plummeting, people are only beginning to realize the horrors that came with that. And two, let's not forget crime. And right now, I think there's this belief that the Democratic Party can just move on from the summer of 2020, when our cities were on fire and one political party, the Democratic Party, was perceived as being on the side of the rioters. And the defund the police movement took hold. And it just sent people fleeing from these cities and to places where they felt more safe. So between freedom and between the crime issue, it's clear Governor DeSantis had a really good night. And look, if this is how he wants to parlay and launch a presidential campaign, he certainly got the track record to prove it now.
Colin, this is Ashley Hayek. It seems like those leaders that took a little bit more of a radical stance against the woke agenda and really prioritized America first are the ones that are running away with the victories tonight. What do you think that says about the positions that leaders need to make moving forward in our country?
Yeah, no, that's right, Ashley. And these decisions that were made in this crazy time of the pandemic, they're not wearing very well over time. And it was really hard for office holders and for leaders to stand up in the early going of the pandemic and say, wait a minute, we shouldn't have our churches shut down. We shouldn't have our kids home. We shouldn't be shutting down our businesses, all for something that, the costs on their side were huge to society, to families, to kids' education. And there's been a lot of issues that have come back and forth over the course of this campaign. Of course, everybody's focused on the economy, as they should be, and inflation and what it's doing to middle-class budgets. But this idea that the government knows best and the government has all the answers and the government should be able to come in and tell people how to live their lives, that's being rejected. And there's a reason that states like Texas and Florida's population are growing, whereas you can't swing a dead cat without hitting a moving truck on its way from California to Austin or Dallas or Houston or somewhere else in Texas or Florida. And that's not by accident. So policies matter, and these candidates that are able to stand on principle and articulate and defend those policies, they tend to get rewarded by voters, and that's what we're seeing tonight, at least in these examples.
Colin, Rob Astorino, your Jersey, where they almost won the governorship last year. I thought that was going to be the start of something very big in the Northeast. I think right now it's a good night, not a great night for Republicans, although that can change as the results start coming in from the West. And if we can win some of the seats that are very, very close right now. But where would that leave us if, let's say, the House picks up 20 seats, has a 20-seat majority, but in areas where there was such high crime and just craziness during a period of time, and they stay Democrat, where does that leave us as a country?
Well, you're right, Rob. And I think in terms of how the cookie's going to crumble at the end of the night, I think the Republicans will win back the House between a margin of 20 and 30 seats. The Senate looks like it's still on track for a Republican flip. It may not be the margin some of us had hoped, but we may have to wait a while on that, given some of the time differences and the West Coast and some of the incredibly close margins here on the East Coast. So where this leaves us as a country is heading into a presidential election. These midterms are just a roadmap for these candidates to then pick up and then run with in a presidential primary. And it's my opinion we're going to see two wide open primaries. I have a hard time seeing President Biden running again for president, and we're going to have a wide open field on the Republican side. There's already some big names forming, and it's going to allow those two contrasting visions to really go at one another on the big stage and let the voters figure out the best way forward.
Colin Reed from South and Hill Strategies. Appreciate your perspective. Thank you very much.
Hey, thanks, Doug. Appreciate it.
Yep. And joining us now is the former mayor of Cleveland, Ohio, and congressional Democrat, presidential candidate as well, Dennis Kucinich, coming from Cleveland. Dennis, good to see you again. Now, let's talk about Ohio a little bit. What are you seeing happening there tonight that we may not be aware of?
They're still counting the votes across the state. And we know for sure that Governor DeWine has won re-election. The race for the Senate between J.D. Vance and Tim Ryan has not been called yet, but it's apparent that J.D. Vance has jumped out to a lead. I don't know if there's going to be enough votes for Tim Ryan to be able to make it up. And the rest of the state, I think, is going to be pretty consistently Republican. However, there are patches where there's Democrats who have been reelected to Congress. In the Columbus area, George Beatty has been reelected. In the Northeast Ohio, Cleveland area, Chantel Brown. We still don't know about what's happening in Northwest Ohio, where Marcy Kaptur, who has been here in Congress for 40 years, is fighting off a challenge as a result of redistricting. So, for the most part, the areas that have been blue have stayed blue, but Ohio has become much more Republican over the last few years.
Ashley Hayek here. President Trump was just in Ohio recently, obviously, last night, and we're seeing that Max Miller looks like won his race. He worked in the Trump administration. What do you think the president's visit impact had, if any, in some of these races?
Well, in areas where the president's done well, his support is intact, and I think that you have to expect that if he does decide that he's going to run again, he'll be a very strong contender for the Republican nomination. Everyone knows in the NFL, for example, you take one game at a time. And so first comes the primaries, and I think he's in pretty good position. However, there is a chance, given given the showing of Governor DeSantis, that many people feel that has emboldened his position as a prospective Republican presidential candidate. It's too early. It's too early to call a number of these elections. If I may, the House of Representatives going into this election had about 26 Democratic seats that were said to be toss-up. The Republicans had about 12. I've looked at some of the results. that of seats that were said to be Democrats that were said to be in trouble. It's not necessarily showing that there's going to be a red wave here. I think that the Republicans are on track to win the House, but the margin may be around 20 seats. It might be less, which in some ways the Democrats in administration will claim a victory because the margin of the turnover is less than it was during the time of President Obama, for example. So we have to wait. I know I've been through many elections, and I have to tell you, the toughest thing is to wait for returns to come in. And the media always wants to know what's going to happen, who won. We're all going to have to wait. The Senate race, keep your eye on what happens in Georgia. If Herschel Walker goes over 50%, that moves the Republicans one step further to taking over the Senate. And again, Nevada, we're not going to know for a while, but that's another race that the Republicans could pick up. If they take that, that's still another step towards control of the Senate. And it's going to be not only this evening, but it might be go into the week as to who won in Pennsylvania. And that might be true of a number of seats. This country is very polarized. I don't think it's a good thing, but it is a political fact. And some red areas are getting redder, some blue areas are getting bluer. There's some fall off in some place in America, in suburban areas for both parties. But I think that when all's said and done, you're going to see a Republican Senate by 1 or 2 votes and a House by perhaps anywhere from 20 to 23 votes.
To that point, go ahead.
No, Congressman, Rob Astorino, I'm just looking at a race, actually, in my congressional district. Michael Lawler is upsetting by 10 points Sean Patrick Maloney. Sean Patrick Maloney is the chairman of the DCCC. He's the guy raising money for Democrats around the country and distributing it. This is a major upset and sends a shockwave. Will there be a great reset by the Democrats if they lose the House by 20 or 30 points or seats? Or are they going to just, you think, double down as they go into a presidential?
This is new information that Sean Patrick Maloney is trailing. Well, what percentage of vote is in?
He was losing by 10 points. I think there was about 70% in. Something like that.
Yeah, well, the Republicans focused on the Hudson Valley.
Yeah.
And Sean Patrick Maloney was a target because he's head of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. But in the closing days of the election, he made a colossal mistake that I think has backfired on him, particularly with working class people, where he talked about the choices that people have to make when food prices go up. And he said, well, you may have to start eating Chef Boyardee, which is, spaghetti out of a can. And I think the image of that showed, or to some people communicated, that maybe Congressman Maloney was not totally in touch with the people in that area. But look, it might still be a long night for him. 10 points is hard to make up with 75% of the vote in. I just want to say that with the Republicans focusing on the Hudson Valley area in New York, you're going to see at least 3 districts in New York that are Democrat that could find themselves in trouble. And the other thing is, what does that augur for the governor's race? I mean, that's something to keep in mind, because that governor's race has tightened up, and Governor Hochul has found herself in a real challenge by Lee Zeldin. So we'll see what will happen there. We may have to be waiting until morning to really get the results in New York. It's a very exciting race, but remember, New York has had Republican governors. It's not a new phenomenon there.
That's so true. All right, former mayor, congressman, and presidential candidate Dennis Kucinich, thanks very much. Good to see you, and for your observations.
Thank you.
Before we move on to our next guest, Ashley just points out to me that NBC News is now projecting that J.D. Vance will be the winner in the state of Ohio for that Senate seat. Joining us now is the National Director of Priests for Life, Father Frank Pavone. Father Pavone, good to see you.
Good to see you again, Doug.
What's your takeaway from the early results? The night is but young, but we're seeing some results.
I'm encouraged, looking at the big picture, what we've been saying throughout this election cycle is that we have to put a roadblock in the way of the Democrats. Their policies have been destroying America. Some of their policies can only be explained by, sadly to say, people in certain positions of power who don't like America, who want America to fail, and just by a victory in at least the House, although I'm still hopeful the Senate will also flip Republican. We'll see. It's going to be apparently a long night. But the point is, it seems pretty certain we're going to be able to put that roadblock. And to me, that is the main prize of this midterm election, because then we have divided government. Then we slow down. In fact, we stop in its tracks in many ways the Biden agenda, the radical Democrat agenda, and we have time again to point out, especially if the House begins some investigations and passes some legislation, at least in the House, that can begin to emphasize even more the profound difference, not only, Doug, in policy, but as we've been discussing on other occasions, the difference in principle. There's the dramatic debate here between the two parties and the direction America is going is a difference in principle. What's the principle about the protection of life? What's the principle behind religious freedom? What's the principle behind education? What's the principle behind America? Do you have a country if you don't have a border? And all these questions are very profound. It goes beyond policy. And I'm going to be very, very happy to at least see that bare minimum, which is actually a very big victory to have divided government once again.
Well, let's talk about that issue which you first mentioned right there, the abortion issue. Since the Supreme Court's Dobbs decision, a lot of Democrats thought that this would be their saving factor in these midterm elections. But in recent weeks, it began to ebb a little bit. You saw fewer advertisements about that issue. The mantra from the Democrats, from the highest Democrat in the land, President Joe Biden, became, we've got to save democracy. Democracy is under threat. What happened to the abortion issue for Democrats?
Two things began to happen. First of all, as they emphasized abortion more and more, the voters started to say, well, yeah, I might be in favor of their policy on abortion, but don't they realize I want better grocery prices than I want late-term abortions? The second thing was and I was very gratified to see, and I still see it, that the right questions started to be asked even by the mainstream media of the Democrat candidates and even of President Biden, the question being, are there any limits that you would place on abortion? Because the fact is that 72 or more.
Well, somebody in the Democratic Party just cut him out of there. It's a joke. We lost him. We'll try to get him back a little bit later on.
I think Father Frank, what he was going to say was 72% of Americans oppose late-term abortion, yes. And that's exactly the policies that the radical left has embraced. We saw it this summer in the Senate when 49 senators, every Democrat senator except for Joe Manchin, voted in favor of late-term abortion.
Yeah.
Rob? No, it's an issue that they really put all their chips in the middle of the table on abortion this year, and whether it pays off is still to be seen. It looks like it's paying off in New York, where the electorate kind of woke up. The Democratic electorate woke up at the end there, where it looks like Kathy Hochul is going to win, and her whole campaign was on abortion. So that's playing out. And, as we go forward, though, I think that's an area where Republicans can and should play offense on.
Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy to not.
Especially with this advocacy for late-term abortion. There were some undefined, limitless abortions right up to the moment of birth, which were very, very few people in America want that. We've got Father Frank Pavone back now. We cut you off in mid-sentence accidentally. I don't know what happened, but good to see you back. Can you recall your train of thought just before we lost you? Because I don't.
Well, no, what we were saying was, yeah, the voters got tired of hearing about the extremism. It turned a lot of people off. I mean, I'm dealing, as you know, with this issue full time, up and down and across the country. And I'm hearing people all the time saying, hey, listen, I'm independent, I'm Democrat, I'm pro-choice. But I never thought that I would hear anybody advocating abortion right up until the time of birth. The American people have never wanted that. There's not a single survey that has shown that anywhere. Now, in certain blue states, this will be an advantage to the Democrats. But these are places where there was already, like New York, an extreme abortion policy. I mean, New York put it in place when the Democrats took over the legislature a few years ago, and they said, hey, let's have abortion right up until birth. So there are certain places where that is the predominant philosophy. But I think going forward, we're going to see, I mean, we've already seen that the Republicans introduced in Congress a measure that is very, very, I mean, when you take a step back and you look at abortion policy, even worldwide, a very, very reasonable, although we would not say it's reasonable to kill any baby, but looking at the big picture, 15 weeks, cutting it off at that point. We've got these bills introduced with a Republican majority, at least in the House. That bill will be introduced again. There will be a vote. And this will be, I think, a very significant advance in the conversation across America on this topic. A conversation, by the way, which will not be short-circuited anymore by somebody simply invoking, oh, well, there's a constitutional right to abortion. Who wants to block a constitutional right? The Supreme Court has cleared up that issue pretty well. There is no constitutional right. Let's debate the issue on its merits.
Father Frank, hi, it's Ashley Hayek.
Hi, Ashley.
Hi. One thing, in addition to abortion, that they went so extreme on was transgender with our kids, right? And so looking at their policies on transgenderism and secretly transitioning children without the knowledge of their parents was another huge issue that I think the left has pushed way too far on. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you know, speaking as a priest and someone who teaches the teachings of the Catholic faith, I saw all during the years of the Trump administration and also just the direction of the Republican Party itself, and of course what happened in Virginia last year on this whole question of education, that this whole matter of the parents being the primary educators of their children has proven to be a key factor in this election. And it's going to be very interesting to see after the dust settles this week how many of these school board elections have been driven by this. I think we're going to see a lot of great victories on the very local level throughout the country this week, and that's crucial. Parents are motivated by when someone starts tampering with their children. There was the comment of Vice President Harris some weeks ago about, oh, our children, you know, as if the state owns the children, and instead of the parents parenting the children. These are again, like life itself, deep issues for the American people, deeply held convictions that many of the voters, I would say most of the voters, never even thought would become political issues or issues that they would have to decide on candidates based on which side of this question they were on. So this is, again, we need to play offense on this, and it's a winning issue for the Republicans.
Father Frank Pavone, always good to hear from you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you all. God bless.
All right, we'll take a short break. Back with Democratic consultant Joe Trippi when we return.
Today, thousands of Christians around the world are experiencing intense persecution because of their faith in Jesus Christ. When one parent or both parents are removed from the home or forbidden to find meaningful work, it brings isolation and poverty. The good news is, in this season of Thanksgiving, you can make a difference. Through the Voice of the Martyrs Christmas Care Project, you can provide hope and encouragement to those children in need. Each backpack contains clothing, toys, and most importantly, Christian literature and a Bible in their own language to empower them and keep them strong in their faith. To find out more, go to ChristmasCare2022.com or call 877-312-2825. Again, that's ChristmasCare2022.com or 877-312-2825.
Is it Christmas now, Papa?
Well, it's not Christmas until we hear the bells.
from Sight and Sound Films.
He is Henry Wadsworth Longfellow.
This holiday season,
I intend for my pen to raise unity, not swords.
Promise me you will not let this war take our sons.
Discover the inspiring true story.
You are that bell, and you are not done ringing.
Of the beloved Christmas Carol.
I heard the bells on Christmas Day.
I Heard the Bells. In theaters this Christmas.
Welcome back to Centerpoint's special election night coverage. The night is relatively young, and it's going to be a long, long night, as we've seen, because we've been discussing how so many of these states have been slow to count their votes. It could be days before we know the final results. But let's get what we know so far from Rob Astorino.
Well, incomplete list, but in the Senate, and it looks like that's going to be still a toss-up, the Senate. Michael Bennet wins in Colorado. Rubio won big in Florida. Rand Paul won big. That was an early call. Tim Scott won big in South Carolina. Budd is going to win in North Carolina, so that's a key hold for the Republicans. Some of the gubernatorial races, Ron DeSantis ran away with it against Charlie Crist in Florida. In Georgia, Brian Kemp won. Let's see if Stacey Abrams concedes this time. In New Hampshire, Chris Sununu won. In Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro will win, so they'll, in the Keystone State, keep a Democrat in the governor's mansion. In Texas, Governor Abbott won again. Beto O'Rourke now 0 for 3. And in Arkansas, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, congratulations, she wins that race.
Somebody joked that look for Beto O'Rourke now to declare his candidacy for president of the United States.
Yes. That's tomorrow's race.
That's right.
Any other observations about these results that you're seeing thus far?
You know, I'm not so sure how big the red wave is. It's, like I said before, it's good. It's not great yet. And we'll see if Walker can win. The independent in that race is taking 1.5 points, which is keeping Walker underneath 50, and that might cause a runoff, which I still think he'll win. It looks like Fetterman is winning against Oz right now. If that holds up, that's a big win for the Democrats. And, you know, we got to move out towards the west to see what happens in Arizona. Right. I think that's going to be really big. And in Nevada, that's going to be really, really big. So still a lot to come in.
And trouble counting votes in those two states to some extent. So it could be a long, long night for them. Let's turn now to Joe Trippi, Democratic Party consultant who knows the inside game of Democratic politics. Joe, good to see you.
Good to see you, Doug.
What are you seeing? Read some tea leaves for me.
Look, I think my own read is in Georgia, I think you'll see Warnock pull into the lead again as most of Atlanta, Fulton County, DeKalb County, Cobb County, the suburbs around Atlanta, there's still a ton of votes left to come in there. And the rural areas that have put Walker into this slightly that he has now, they're already in. They're going to outnumber what's still left in the Atlanta and Atlanta suburb area. So I think in the end the question there will be, it's the same one, whether it's Walker or Warnock. Does Warnock get over 50 and avoid the runoff? We'll see. But I think that one's still in play for sure for Democrats. Fetterman, I think. It looks like he's got a good enough lead to hold in Pennsylvania, and so I agree in a lot of ways. Right off the bat here with Arizona, with over 50% of the vote, and Kelly looks really, really strong, and so I think we could be down to Nevada in terms of looking at how this plays out in terms of where the Senate ends up. But right now, I'd say it's a 50-50 tie, and we could be right back in the same place. And, of course, still the runoffs question in Georgia. The House, it's not a red wave. It's just not. It may be a red ripple. I'm sure that the House the Republicans will take the House. But you've got some really, so far, it doesn't look like a wave in terms of the House seats that have already been called. Some of them, Democrats needed to win more than their fair share. We're winning more of those toss-up seats, but not enough.
Are you surprised? Are you surprised that J.D. Vance, I'm turning back to the Senate now, J.D. Vance, NBC has projected
like
him.
Gohmert in Colorado.
Okay, we got a little bit of a breakup in your feed, but let me ask you a question, if you can hear me. Are you surprised that NBC News is projecting J.D. Vance to be the winner in Ohio? Always, I've noticed in Ohio that Cuyahoga County, which is Cleveland, is always late to bring in their votes. Heavily Democratic area that can sway elections in that state. Are you surprised by that?
No, I mean, Cuyahoga County will come in. More votes will come in. I'm sure Ryan will close. But look, I've worked on decision desks in multiple networks. I have a lot of respect for those people because they're looking at actual results, not the exit polls, but actual results. It doesn't surprise me at all that with as many votes out in Cuyahoga County that they'd still be able to call it, just looking at sample precincts and things like that. So no, I think it'll close, but clearly not enough for Tim Ryan, who I think ran an incredibly strong race.
You know what, Joe? We're going to take a break because you're breaking up a little bit. So we've got another guest on the line in our cavalcade of guests tonight. Let's go to David Drucker, who's standing by in Atlanta, Georgia, at the Herschel Walker party. Or whether or not it's a victory party or a concession speech, just way too early to know that. David, what's the latest you're hearing?
Well, Herschel Walker came out a little while ago and addressed the crowd, said he was prepared for a long night, that he still expected to win, and that he would be spending the night, or at least the foreseeable hours, in his war room here at his hotel in Atlanta, Georgia. And right now, with a level of vote in, and the way this thing is neck and neck at about 49.5, 48.5, the Walker with a slight edge. The last time I checked, it could be headed to a runoff. So there may be no victory speech and no concession speech by anybody this evening. We'll just have to wait and see how the rest of the vote unfolds here in Atlanta.
Right. For those of our viewers who don't understand how the runoff works in the state of Georgia, if no candidate gets a margin above 50%, then it goes to a runoff, which will be held December 6th between the two candidates, correct? And simple majority wins, David? Is that correct?
Well, at that point, you only have two candidates in the race, and so somebody's going to get 50+1. There is a Libertarian candidate in this contest, and often in these statewide contests in Georgia, there's a Libertarian candidate gets just enough of the vote to prevent the winner from getting to 50%. It happened 2 years ago in both Senate races. Each winner failed to garner 50%, and there were runoffs that January 5th, 21. In Senator Warnock's case, he was running in a special election to finish the term of retired Senator Johnny Isakson, who has since passed away. He finished ahead of Kelly Loeffler, but needed a runoff to finish to win election to the Senate.
Ashley Hayek here. Hi. I'm curious what the vibe is down there right now. How is everybody feeling? Are they optimistic? Are they still kind of nervous? What sense do you have for the party in Atlanta right now?
Right, so the room's cleared out a little bit, but Herschel Walker came out. It was around 10:30, and he said, look, I know some of you may need to go home. You may need to go to work in the morning. And so he wanted to say a few words. And as you can tell, there's still excitement in this room behind me as various races are called for Republicans, and as they look at some of the results coming in here in Georgia. So there's still a lot of optimism. Different political insiders have addressed the crowd and assured them that they've looked at the numbers and they expect a victory here. And so people are still feeling good. It's just taking a little longer, at least from their perspective.
David Drucker in Atlanta, Georgia. we'll keep in touch with you. Thanks very much. You may notice whenever you try to do a Zoom meeting in a crowded room with other people using the same Wi-Fi that you get that kind of breakup. I suspect that's probably what's going on there, but it's okay because we've got our own set of panelists right here who can wax eloquently about the evening and what lies ahead. What's your general observations about what you're seeing thus far?
Well, one of the things I've noticed is you have Jennifer Kagan in Virginia, Katie Britt in Alabama, Sarah Huckabee. This is a year of the America First woman.
Yes.
It is absolutely phenomenal to see how many Republican women are winning. America First women are winning across the country.
And almost, let me just interrupt because almost uniformly they are really smart, unlike some Republican women candidates we've seen in past election cycles. Really smart, really telegenic, and fighters.
Yes, and one thing that I absolutely love is the left always tries to perpetuate this notion that women cannot be mothers and career people, that you have to have abortions or you cannot have a good family life, and they are completely defying all of that across the board and setting an amazing example for future generations of women. So.
Well, you're also seeing in the Republican Party a new colors and stripes coming in, right? Not just women, but women of color, men of color, and it's a different projection of the party and a good one because, of course, the Democrats always portray themselves as being the party of the minorities, but that's not what you're seeing anymore. You're seeing many more minorities move towards the right. New immigrants going towards Republicans this year. Kathy Hochul has been declared the winner in New York for governor, and I think the Republicans were hoping that would be a huge pickup and that it would be closer than it was. And what's disturbing about that is the crime issue was front and center in New York, and ultimately New Yorkers in New York City voted against their own safety to vote for abortion. Right. And that's really what it came down to. Right. So you're going to see that play out in some of these races, and when the fog dissipates tomorrow, a lot of questions are going to be answered, not answered still, I think.
Well, that gets to the Pennsylvania race, the Senate race, Oz versus Fetterman. It seems like Fetterman's still holding his own there. I can't think of a less qualified candidate than Fetterman, yet he may very well win this election. Well, he's up by 1 now, so there's still plenty of time for that to change. It may be days before that's...
Well, now, if I'm Oz and the Republicans, boy, they better be careful. There's no bags walking into Philadelphia right now, bagged with ballots in Georgia and Fulton County and here, because this is going to come down to who takes over the Senate.
Right. But to make my point, then you go ahead, Ashley. It seems to me that oftentimes we try to game these races with all the minutiae of it, but it kind of boils down to, I'm a Democrat, my daddy was a Democrat, my great-granddaddy was a Democrat, and that's how I'm voting, even if the guy can't speak.
Yeah.
I don't care.
It's weird, honestly. You look at it, if anyone watched that debate or saw clips of it, I mean, obviously, he suffered a stroke, and the effects of that are still there. And he clearly cannot do the job, but it doesn't matter because Democrats in Pennsylvania said, I'd rather have someone like Fetterman who, if someone has to push the button for him to vote yes, they'll do that.
And Ashley, this brings back your point about the strong young crop of Republican women. This country has a big problem with aging politicians. I'm not just talking about Joe Biden. You look at people like Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer,
McConnell.
Mitch McConnell, Dianne Feinstein in California, the Democratic senator from California, who it's an open secret in Washington, D.C. that she is no longer functioning, that her staff does all the work for her, that she has got either some form of dementia or senility, but at the very least, she's a very, very old lady. And it seems to me that the Democrats are lagging behind Republicans, at least when it comes to farm teams and a new array of people to take over.
That's right. And we'll see it at the school board level this year, too, as you see more parents who ran for office. We see it in Florida with Anna Paulina Luna, young Latino who just got elected. She's now Congresswoman-elect in South Florida. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity here for growth for the Republican Party specifically and for what we can do in the future. One thing, to your point earlier about the crime issue, Shapiro being elected when you have record
in New York
crime
State, you're talking about.
in Pennsylvania.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, record crime in Pennsylvania, and then he was the Attorney General.
Yeah, right.
The Attorney General. That's actually kind of shocking to me. It's really disappointing.
Right. I think it's happening all across the country. It lends credence to what Joe Trippi was just saying, that he doesn't believe there's going to be a red wave, that it's more like a red trickle. And then in the Senate, as I pointed out, the New York Times now has it leaning towards Democrats. So we'll see how it all shapes up. Shall we take a break? Back with more right after this.
Introducing Vinia, a new miracle superfood that has emerged from the Holy Land that is clinically proven to increase your blood circulation. For an investment of about $1 a day, enjoy the health benefits of 1 bottle of red wine in each capsule of Vinia, minus the alcohol, sugar, and calories, and echo the age-old wisdom to take a little wine for your health's sake. A clinical trial showed that Vinia significantly increased dilation of arteries for each person who took 1 capsule of Vinia daily for 3 months. Vinia significantly increases your blood flow and the delivery of oxygen and nutrients to your brain, heart, and other tissues, providing you with improved heart health, physical energy, and mental alertness. So order your Vinia today at ViniaBloodFlow.com or call 800-600-3619. That's ViniaBloodFlow.com or call 800-600-3619. Vinia, better blood flow, better life.
The more you think about how blessed you are, the more you have a desire to be generous.
For your gift of support in any amount, we want to send you Joyce Meyer's enriching book, The Power of Thank You. And for your gift of just $50 or more, we'll also include CeCe Winans' inspirational book and her uplifting worship CD, Believe for It.
Believe, and God will show up and do what only He can do.
Thank you, friend, for supporting the miracle of Christian television around the globe.
A beautiful shot of the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C., which is pretty much largely deserted. Why? Because all of those representatives and senators are back in their home districts watching election results tonight. But Erick Stakelbeck is in Washington with the latest on what he's hearing there. Eric?
Doug, very interesting scenario playing out right now, really nationwide, where you have populist candidates like, say, a J.D. Vance in Ohio, legitimately populist with a working class background. He's winning. Then you have John Fetterman in Pennsylvania. As you guys were just discussing, it kind of boggles the mind, a guy who has really trouble putting sentences together at this point, and radical left-wing policies, and yet it's a state I know very well, Doug, Pennsylvania. I'm from Pennsylvania originally, and Fetterman had this kind of fake blue-collar vibe that he's been trying to give off with tattoos and hoodies and sleeves rolled up. Yet his background was anything but blue collar. You have J.D. Vance in Ohio, authentic blue collar roots. He wins. Fetterman ahead right now in Pennsylvania, trying to play the blue collar role, but really not representing that in a real sense. But it shows you, I think, a hunger for people, for authenticity, authentically blue collar voices. Fetterman's not authentic, but he certainly tried to give off that vibe, and it appears he's had success doing it. But I think populism in working class areas across the country, you see a strong hunger for that, for real candidates who actually represent the values of those states. And the thing that's frustrating to watch Pennsylvania play out is Fetterman is anything but that. He tried to give off a blue collar appeal, but he's not the real deal. The race isn't over yet there in Pennsylvania. It's going to go down to the wire. We might not have all the results until a few days from now, but right now, Fetterman, I think, has really exceeded expectations after that disastrous debate performance 2 weeks ago.
You know, hearkening back to what we were just saying about it's sort of inexplicable how he maintains his popularity in the face of what is plainly evident. I hearken back to that recording of Mitt Romney during the 2012 election, where he was speaking at an off-the-record fundraiser, and somebody recorded the conversation, and he freely admitted that I think the number he used was 47%. 47% of the electorate is on some form of government handouts, and I was stunned by that. He was absolutely savaged in the press when that got out, but it was not untrue. And I suspect that that number, especially post-COVID, has gone up. And I wonder if that might reflect the popularity of a guy like Fetterman. The people who are migrating south are taking a lot of those red votes away from the northern states, leaving, I don't want to say people on the dole behind, but there is that little bit of component of it.
Yeah, Doug, you expressed it better than I just did a minute ago. I think you're hitting on something there. And you guys discussed it earlier. The Northeast part of the country seems to be solidifying and not in a positive way. We saw the result, of course, in the New York governor's race tonight with Kathy Hochul prevailing. New York City right now, Doug, I'm there pretty frequently. It's a bit of a mess right now, to say the least. And Pennsylvania as well now potentially going for Fetterman. Of course, Josh Shapiro won the governor's race there as well. So I think that's a great point. The Northeast seems to be kind of entrenched in many ways in those old ways, and a lot of that is people on the dole, as you mentioned. But we do have people, and we saw this with DeSantis, Abbott tonight, we do have people migrating to red states. It's really fascinating to see how things are really breaking down here, where Texas and Florida seem to be beacons of hope for people. And you guys mentioned earlier, more and more New Yorkers going to Florida, of course. We have Californians going to Texas in droves. I think the concern among Floridians and Texans is that perhaps they will bring their voting habits with them to red states. But it's really fascinating to see the mass migration of people. And it seems like the dividing line, so to speak, is kind of drawn. Blue states in the Northeast seem to want to remain blue, at least for now. We'll see what happens in 2024 with the presidential election.
The one caveat to all this is that the West Coast states have not yet come in with any kind of election results, so that may change. We shall see.
Yes.
I want to ask you before we leave you, Eric, about something which has nothing to do with elections. It stands right behind you right now. People may have noticed in that beautiful shot of yours, if you can just move a little bit to your right, a shot of the Capitol, and it seems to be sheathed in a white covering. At least the House and the Senate are.
Yeah.
And that is an interesting project that's underway right now. It's scaffolding that's draped in a white cloth with lighting underneath it. And the scaffolding is not any kind of protective measure for people or for another January 6th in the offing. No, no, not at all. That is a construction project. The Capitol is literally falling apart. It's an old building, you know, dating back to the Civil War, and the combination of wind, water, and just weather in general have taken their toll on the Capitol building. So they're beginning a refurbishment of the stonework of the United States Capitol. That's going to be a years-long project. You're paying for it, you taxpayers out there. So enjoy the finished product whenever it does. But it looks really beautiful, doesn't it, Eric?
It does. It's been great to be here, Doug. Great to be here with you. A beautiful night here in D.C. for sure.
All right. Thanks for checking in, Eric. We'll be back.
Thanks, Doug.
All right, we're going to take a break and then back with Pastor Alan Jackson right after this.
As we naturally age, many people are getting zero amount of this incredible and unique substance. That's when we start seeing an impact in our joints, skin, nails, and even our digestion.
People ask me, Dr. X, what is the #1 supplement I should be taking? My answer is multi-collagen protein.
I love the multi-collagen protein, and I've seen huge benefits. I went from having joint discomfort to where now I have freedom of mobility that I did not have. I've been able to work out more. I've had the energy. Ancient nutrition provides us with the right supplements that we need in order to be strong, healthy, and to do the things that God has actually called us to do.
Call the number on your screen and get a free bottle with your preferred customer order, a value of over $50 free.
When you call and purchase, you are helping to spread the gospel around the world by supporting TBN.
Call the number on your screen or go online now.
I'm Judas. Shalom, Judas. There will come a time you will follow in my footsteps, and you will know what it actually means to give up your life. Are you ready to do hard things? Yes. We will see.
And we're back with Pastor Alan Jackson right now. Sum it up, what you've seen so far this evening from your perspective, which is an entirely different perspective from, say, a political consultant.
It is. I'm certainly not a political consultant, but I live in the country, and my future's in play, too. I feel pretty prophetic at the moment. I think we'll wake up tomorrow, and about midday, we will hear that the Republicans think they won and the Democrats think they won, and we're going to hear about a red wave and a blue wall, and the media will take their normal place. Yeah. And I think too many people are going to feel dissatisfied once again. And I think what happens in Washington, D.C. is a reflection of what happens in Main Street in our nation. And we need a heart change more than we need a change in our political class. I look forward to the day when we can choose between candidates on both sides of the aisle that reflect the biblical worldview. When we get to that point, when we recognize that our families matter and our children matter and our borders have to be secure or we're not a sovereign nation, that we can't spend money we don't have. Those aren't Republican or Democratic ideas. Those are the ideas that come from a biblical worldview that have made our nation strong. And we have hyphenated our faith. We've been Republican Christians or Democrat Christians or Southern Christians or something. And if our lives don't begin with that Christian identity, we have no legitimate faith. And I think that's really the wake-up call. And I think it started with COVID. I'm hopeful. I think we have to have a wave of the fear of God, where we fear God more than we want our own selfish way. And that's hard work. And that's, you know, it's far more important what happens in my house than what happens in the White House. And we've been wanting a savior to get elected. And we have a savior. But the church is going to have the courage to take that message back to Main Street in our nation. We've been too concerned with being politically correct.
Who echoed that same word was Barbara Bush in a speech at Smith College, for which she was roundly criticized many years ago, that what happens in your house is much more important than what happens in the White House. I've been hogging all the questions with you, Pastor Jackson. I want to get...
Let's play Stump the Faster.
I want to get my colleagues involved here.
Well, it seems like the candidates and congressional members-elect and everyone is very polarized right now, and the issues are so extreme on both sides. You know, when we do wake up tomorrow, how do we as a country begin to heal and start moving forward so we put our policies first, our families first, our faith first again?
I think that's such an important question. I don't think there's an easy answer. I feel like the American public is like a punch-drunk fighter. You know, we've been hit with so many absurd statements that the people are a bit addled. And we need to figure out again where a source of truth is. And there's a lot of components in that. And the church is as much a failed part of that story as anybody else. But, you know, if we don't enforce our borders, if we can't define what family is, if we can't identify a man or a woman, if we can't decide that we can't live beyond our means, those aren't complicated issues. But they're being presented to us in such confusing ways that people can't get their bearings again. When they told the people in the churches to go home, they couldn't meet, but they left the liquor stores and Home Depot open, and the church people didn't say anything. So I'm not surprised. They tell us to follow the science, but what California does is different than Tennessee. And science is consistent from state to state. And so I think the people are a bit addled, and we need voices of truth with the courage to walk that forward without bathing it in some self-interest, whether it's Republican or Protestant or Catholic or Democrat or Southern, or whatever that might be. If we can find the truth again, we'll find our way forward.
That's right.
How do we have a conversation? We're in this country, we're having two separate conversations, you know, and everyone's running to their corner. And like abortion, for instance, is probably the most dishonest debate we have in this country, maybe in the world, where one side, you know, it's couched as choice, and as we know what the Democratic position is now, unfettered access up to the moment of birth. And another side says, wait a minute, you know, are you kidding me? This is a human life. It's not a tomato. It's not a cat. And yet we're having two totally different conversations. How do we actually get to a point where we can have an honest discussion with people we disagree with?
Well, I'm more qualified to speak to it from my side of the discussion. So I live in that biblical worldview arena. And I think we have to have a fundamental change of heart. I don't even accept your premise that we have to have a fair-minded conversation. When there's right and wrong,
yeah, I agree.
I don't want to be fair. You know, if you're coming through the window of my house in the middle of the night, I don't want to be fair to you. I intend to stop you. And the sanctity of human life doesn't deserve a fair conversation. It needs people with the courage to protect the children. And we have lacked that courage. We didn't want to be canceled. We didn't want to be labeled. So we have been quiet. They told us that our worldview wasn't welcome in the corporate boardroom. It was inappropriate to bring your faith into that setting. And now we see the corporate boardroom taking a worldview and forcing it into the heart of our culture and punishing us for anything from, when it's my body, my choice, until I want you to take a vaccine, and then you'll take the vaccine, or by God, I'll fire you. It's going to take more courage on the side of those people who have adopted a biblical worldview, not in anger, not to be belligerent, certainly not to be violent, but we're going to have a new kind of determination.
But there's a whole flawed thought process. You mentioned that an unborn baby is not a cat, but I guarantee you that so many people who believe in abortion would be appalled at the idea of aborting kittens.
Oh, they'd be protesting outside the pet shop.
And that's what seems to be so flawed. It just goes to the heart of a lack of respect for human life.
Absolutely.
The culture of death as opposed to a culture of life.
The most vulnerable amongst us, the very young, the very old, those who are unstable, we're overwhelmed with our selfishness. You can pick up almost any topic, our spending patterns. I mean, we're bankrupt as a nation, and we lack the courage to say that. So in front of this election, the government's given away, what, $3.5 trillion to special interest groups? Now, they've wrapped it in fancy language, but that's the reality of it. And we lack the moral courage to say that out loud because we don't want to deal with the pushback.
Well, you brought up the point of the border, right? And you don't hear the left talking about the human dignity of the toddlers that are drowning in the river. You don't talk about the human dignity of the 50 immigrants, illegal immigrants who are shoved in the back of a truck and die.
Right.
That conversation's not happening at all, and that's a conversation we have to start happening right now, so we can correct that and secure our border and make it safe.
We have to have a grassroots expression of courage.
That's right.
We need the healthcare professionals to tell the truth about what they know. We need the people in the educational systems to tell what they know. The government doesn't control our children and their education. That's parents' responsibility. We have to have a fundamental change from the grassroots up if we're going to maintain our freedom and liberty.
There's a real hunger for, in our soul for things. And I'm even aware this is such a simple act as going to the shopping mall and looking at all these people who are trying to feed something that's missing them by purchasing things. I always tell my wife, get me out of here. After like 5 minutes, I can't stand this. Get me out of here.
Hence Amazon showing up at your house.
Amen.
That too. All right. We got a guest waiting in the wings. Former Congressman Louie Gohmert for Texas is standing by with his perspective on this evening. So we're seeing, Congressman, by the way, thanks very much for joining us. Well, I hope you can hear me, but anyway, I was going to say, we're seeing a little bit of a dulling of the red wave. Joe Trippi, who we just talked to, is now calling it a red trickle. And the Senate side appears to be not so much in jeopardy of losing the Democrat Party. Your thoughts?
Well, it's not the massive red wave that people had hoped for, but the bottom line is, we didn't get here overnight. We've gone through 40, 50 years of the left taking over our universities and teaching future teachers that socialism is a good thing, that it's okay to give your freedom to a totalitarian government if we're going to all share and share alike. Well, you're giving up freedom. You're giving up your chance to publicly worship God or worship anybody, because as Dostoevsky said, the main problem with socialism is atheism. So we didn't get here overnight, and we were hoping we'd have a big wave, but the bottom line has never changed. We've got to get back to doing what Moses said was clear from God, that we need to educate our children and make sure they understand where their freedoms come from. And that hasn't happened. So we will squeak by, I think, tonight, but we've got a great deal of work, and it's not in days or weeks or months. It's in years and decades to get this country back to where they recognize our freedoms come from God, from our Creator, just as the Declaration of Independence made clear.
Congressman, Ashley Hayek here. What do parents need to do in order to, pick up this torch now? We see what happens across the country. You talk about teaching our children. What more do we need to do as parents to make sure that our children are educated? And, so many kids don't have the parents that are going to be involved anymore. You have two-parent working homes, not as much time invested, attack on the nuclear family too. What do we need to do as a community to start moving that forward?
Well, coming from you, I know that's a bit rhetorical because we have got to have people get back involved in education, get back involved in the school boards, get back involved in making sure that teachers teaching their children are not teaching them what one young lady said. Why she went trans is because she was told by her middle school teachers that, gee, if you look in the mirror and don't like what you see or not comfortable with it, then that means you're trans. We have got to get people like that out of the schools so they're no longer miseducating our children. And this is not going to happen overnight, but we're seeing more and more people, especially after CRT came out and the trans stuff being taught at drag shows at schools. People are waking up, but they have got to not just have it be a 1 month thing or one election thing. It's got to be going on from now on and people involved. And I think we're going to see more of that.
Congressman Louie Gohmert, appreciate your time. We're running out on the satellite window, so we got to say goodbye. Rumors of your political death have been greatly exaggerated. I said you were a former congressman. I know you're not, but you announced you're leaving Congress, so we got that. Have a happy life after Congress. You got to go. Okay. All right, bye-bye. Let's join Sean Feucht right now, Christian singer, joining us from Los Angeles. You met with Carrie Lake. Have you had a chance to speak to her? I know you met with her, what was it, last week, I think?
Yeah, no, I actually just got out of a wild worship service. We've been praying for 7 days with, tens of thousands of people for these elections, and we just got out of an incredible worship night election service here in Orange County. I haven't had a chance to connect with her, but we're definitely praying and believing for good things tonight.
Yeah. So what's your perspective on the evening thus far?
Well, it's really early. I think that, I hear a lot of people talking, and I think it might even be too early to begin to make judgments on whether it's a red wave, whether it's a trickle, whether it's a whatever. We really need to, it's going to take a little bit. Of course, there was all kind of issues in Arizona. You guys saw that 20% of the machines weren't working in Maricopa County. That's going to be a big issue. There's a lot of issues that came out of Pennsylvania. Of course, Georgia, that's a tight race right there, and it might go to a runoff. But we did see some incredible things. I mean, Miami-Dade County flipping hasn't happened in decades. I want to just say, why don't we just make America Florida, amazing things out of there. J.D. Vance, of course, winning. There's a lot of good things to celebrate, but I think there's bigger victories coming, but, it's going to take a bit.
Sean, Rob Astorino, speaking of Florida, I think you're going to have many more New Yorkers now have Sunshine State plates on their car real soon because Kathy Hochul won again, or won in New York. In Arizona, there's two big races, and it looks like the Democrats could win them both, which the sleeper issue in Arizona and for the rest of the country is the open border. And Arizona deals with it on such a high level. And yet, if they let the Democrats win both governor and U.S. Senate, I don't know what that says about where we are as a nation, as a sovereign nation with regard to the border, because apparently if that's not a big enough issue for Arizona to change, then how are the rest of us going to have to deal with this?
Yeah, and it's not even just Arizona. It's not even just people in Arizona facing that. It's the fentanyl crisis. Sure. It's the #1 killer right now for, teenagers up into the 30s. It is an actual crisis, and it blows my mind. There's there's not that much nuance. If you're a believer and you're looking at these elections, there's not a lot of nuance. There's not a lot of middle ground. I mean, you have one side that wants to give puberty blockers to kids. You know, they want to allow abortion up until the day of birth, you know, the day before birth. They want to allow fentanyl to continue to pour into the country. You know, they want, I mean, I could go on and on and on. And I think what blows my mind is how are believers asleep? I mean, if the church simply voted the Bible, it wouldn't even be a contest right now in America.
You know, Sean, I want to get Pastor Jackson in this discussion too, because we've been talking about how Christians need to get involved in this culture war, and you took a really strong stand in this culture war by performing concerts during the height of the epidemic against state and local regulations. You were fined. You've told me last time we were speaking to you on the air how often you were fined for giving concerts, open-air concerts, in places where there were mask mandates and public gathering mandates. And you made, I wonder if he's setting a pattern here that others could follow of the Christian faith.
Well, I think absolutely. And he's willing to tell the truth and to demonstrate courage and to stand up for what he believes is right. Mm-hmm. You know, I think for far too long, Christian leaders have polled their audience before they decided what they believed. Yeah. And we've got to stop that. Yeah. You know, we have to decide we're going to be a voice for what God has handed us.
Sean, does that the fact that you incurred all these fines and everything, does that in retrospect outweigh the courage that it took to perform those concerts? I mean, are you tallying up the balance sheet like, oh gosh, I shouldn't have done that? When I'm looking at my bank account now.
It wasn't just fines. We got attacked by Antifa. We were, you know, attacked by Satanists. We were maligned by much of the church. I mean, our friends deserted us. I mean, there were things that hurt more than just money. I mean, we were destroyed in the media and called super spreaders and, you know, all this stuff. But I think what's interesting is that a lot of Christians and believers, bringing it back to your original point, they would say, you know, I don't really want to get involved in the government. I don't need my faith to be political. But what we realized in COVID is the government wants to get involved with you. And they will get involved with you, and they will tell you when you can have church, when you need to shut down, you know, what vaccine you need to take in order to do da-da-da-da-da. I mean, we're seeing a tyrannical power of government in America unlike we've ever seen before. I mean, Biden said the first thing that he's going to do if he controls the Senate and Congress is he's going to codify Roe v. Wade. That should alarm every believer right there. I mean, there's the dividing line. You know, he wants to codify the shedding of innocent blood as his #1 act after this election. And so, you know, I think we cannot sit on the sidelines anymore. We can't afford to be on the reactionary defense. We really got to go on offense. And that's what our heart was during the pandemic. People need the church right now. The last thing we need to be doing is cowering in fear. They need hope. They need salvation. They need breakthrough.
Sean Feucht, we really, truly do appreciate your voice. And I'm not just talking about your singing voice either. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me.
All right, it's been a couple hours since we last checked in with former Congressman from Georgia, Bob Barr. Congressman, what are you seeing in Georgia? Read some more tea leaves for me, if you would.
Well, by the way, I very much enjoyed listening to Sean there because he's absolutely correct from the standpoint that if, in fact, the Republicans take control of the House, especially if they take control also of the Senate, there is a lot they can do, even if they don't control, as they won't for the next 2 years, the White House. The power of appropriations is a very, very strong tool that the Republicans can use to force budget items that Biden will have to sign. So there's a lot they can do, and I hope they do that.
Let me interrupt you right there, Congressman. Let me interrupt you right there, because the first thought that came to my mind is hearkening back to the Obama administration. After he suffered terrible midterm losses, he said, I got a pen and I got a phone. And he turned to executive orders in much the same way that President Biden is already doing.
Well, the Republicans in the Congress can stop that also by providing appropriations riders, that is, restrictions that prohibit the use of any funds appropriated to carry out those executive orders. And if they attach those to must-pass bills that Biden has to sign, they can stop him. if they choose to do it. They can also bring actions in the court. There have been 2 successful court actions gone to the Supreme Court over the decades that have stopped unconstitutional executive orders. One in the Truman administration, one in the Clinton administration. So if the Republicans actually stick to their guns and follow through on these things, they can, in fact, stop unconstitutional executive orders. So, we have to see if the Republicans have the backbone and the wherewithal and the consistency to do that, which I hope they will, if they have control of at least one house and hopefully both houses of the Congress. With regard to Georgia, Doug, I'm very optimistic right now to see that Herschel Walker is slightly ahead, the last figures I saw, of Raphael Warnock. This is a major move for him to be ahead of an incumbent U.S. senator. And I think he owes a great deal of debt to Brian Kemp, who surged ahead of Stacey Abrams by several percentage points. And I think that is lifting Herschel Walker beyond where he was able to just on his own. So it's a team effort, and I hope that he stays ahead and avoids a runoff. But if he does get stuck in a runoff, I feel very optimistic he'll win the runoff.
Congressman Bob Barr, thanks very much for your time, sir. Really appreciated your joining us this evening.
My pleasure, Doug.
We got some time, a couple of minutes for some final thoughts. Let's start with you, Rob.
Well, just in New York, it's interesting. Hochul wins big, but it looks like the 3 Hudson Valley congressional seats have flipped to Republican, which is interesting. And that could certainly solidify the House for the GOP. If Fetterman holds on, and which would be a surprise to me, but if he does, then they've got a good shot of keeping the House, keeping the Senate. I'm really interested to see what's happening now out west.
Yeah,
if Oregon can
true.
flip, as bad as Portland was and has been, and if they could flip that governor's race, which is really tight, Arizona, I think it's all going to come down to Arizona and Nevada. Let's not forget about Laxalt in Nevada. So there's still hope, I think, for the Republicans to win the Senate. They're definitely winning the House. So if nothing else, some of the Biden agenda is going to be stopped, and there's going to be investigations, and we'll start finding things out.
Ashley?
I think one thing that Bob brought up that is really, really important is the courts. And that is going to be a huge tool for conservatives moving forward, and it's the power of litigation. And whether or not we win in those court cases or lose, the fact that we are pushing the issue, we have majority conservative Supreme Court justices now. That's significant. That was a big win for President Trump, and it's breaking right now. Republicans will get a conservative majority on the North Carolina Supreme Court, which is also significant. So those little things that we tend to overlook are going to be very big wins for the conservative and the America First movement.
You're so right about the courts, but here's the problem with that. Half the country, or I wouldn't say half, because the activist part of that half of the country sees those courts as the enemy. We had, would-be assassin outside Justice Kavanaugh's home this summer. Other death threats to members of the court and appeals courts. Not a good situation. And it draws attention, again, to this fundamental reality that no matter what happens in this election tonight, I believe, and I think probably we are all in agreement, that this country has fundamentally changed, and not for the better. When you have a country that's talking about, just to pull one example out of thin air, counseling prepubescent kids to take puberty blockers, or teenage kids to lop off their genitals, you've got a dysfunctional society. That this should be considered in any way, shape, or form as legitimate, you've got a real problem. And that's just one example I'm pulling out of thin air. I'll let you have the final thought, Pastor. What an introduction.
No. Well, I think the political arena reflects the hearts of the nation, obviously.
Right. Yeah.
And we have work to do. We shouldn't be surprised at that. I've spent the last few months traveling across the country, and I have hope because I see at a fundamental level people turning their hearts to God again. People whose family systems have a heritage of faith, but they turned away from it, and they realize the fallacy of that. That has to grow. We're Christ followers first, and out of that comes the rest of our story. And if we'll return to our faith and return to that, it's going to take strength and courage, but we'll see this change.
Well, we're going to wrap up our coverage right now at the top of the hour. As we leave you, just be assured that you can find the election results on all those other networks, but you'll never see a program on election results like the one you saw here tonight with this kind of perspective and this kind of perspective. Thank you all for joining us tonight, and thank all the studio crew who stayed up so late with us tonight. That's going to do it from Centerpoint. You have a wonderful night. We'll talk to you tomorrow.